I thought I knew what trust felt like. I really did. For 12 years, I believed I had built something unshakable with Jason, a marriage where honesty wasn't just a word we said during our vows, but a foundation we stood on every single day. My name is Sandra, I'm 38 years old, and I work as a pediatric nurse at County General. I've always been the kind of person who believes in second chances, who sees the good in people, who gives the benefit of the doubt. Maybe that's why it took me so long to see what was right in front of me. Or maybe I just didn't want to see it. Because the moment I finally did, everything I thought I knew about my husband, about us, about the life we'd carefully constructed together, it all came crashing down like a house of cards in a summer storm. It started with something so small, so insignificant, that I almost laugh now thinking about how a single name could unravel 12 years of marriage. Ruth. That's all it was at first, just a name that kept appearing in conversations, in texts, in the little moments between dinner and bedtime when Jason would check his phone and smile in that distant way that made me feel like I was suddenly on the outside of an inside joke. Let me take you back to where we were before Ruth became a constant presence in our lives. Jason and I met in college. He was studying architecture, and I was working my way through nursing school. We were young and broke and stupidly in love, the kind of love where you eat ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week and call it romantic. We got married at 26, bought our first house at 29, a modest 3-bedroom colonial with blue shutters and a maple tree in the front yard that turned the most incredible shade of crimson every October. We tried for years to have children, went through the fertility treatments, the disappointments, the grief that comes with wanting something so desperately and having your body refuse to cooperate. Eventually, we made peace with it being just the two of us. We poured our love into other things, our careers, our home, Sunday morning farmers markets, Friday night movie marathons on our worn leather couch with a bowl of butter-drenched popcorn between us. Our life wasn't extraordinary, but it was ours. And I thought it was enough. I thought I was enough. Ruth came into the picture about 8 months ago. Jason had just started working at a new architecture firm downtown, Bennett & Associates, after his previous company downsized. He was nervous about the transition, about proving himself in a new environment at 41, about being the new guy again after 15 years of seniority at his old job. I remember the night before his first day, we stayed up late in bed, the lamp on his nightstand casting soft shadows across his worried face. I held his hand and told him he was brilliant, that they were lucky to have him, that everything would be fine. And I meant every word. For the first month, he came home each evening with stories about his new colleagues, about learning the office culture, about the projects they were working on. Then Ruth's name started appearing. Casually at first. Ruth showed me how they organized the filing system. Ruth and I grabbed coffee during lunch. Ruth thinks we should approach the Henderson project differently. I didn't think much of it. Jason had always had work friends, men and women both. In all our years together, I'd never had a reason to be jealous or suspicious. He wasn't that kind of man. Or so I thought. But gradually, subtly, Ruth stopped being just a colleague and became a constant character in the narrative of his days. By month 3, barely an evening went by without her name coming up. Ruth told the funniest joke today. Ruth and I are working late on the proposal. Ruth recommended this restaurant we should try. I started noticing the way his face would light up when he talked about her, the way he'd laugh at stories about things she said, the way he seemed more animated, more alive when recounting their conversations than he did when talking to me about my day. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that I was just feeling insecure because Jason and I had hit a rough patch, nothing dramatic, just the slow erosion that sometimes happens in long marriages. The conversations that had become more functional than intimate. The sex that had dwindled from passionate to perfunctory to practically non-existent. The way we'd started living parallel lives in the same house, two people going through the motions of a marriage without really connecting anymore. I thought maybe I was projecting my own fears onto an innocent friendship. But then came the evidence. The little pieces that, when looked at individually, seemed harmless, but when assembled together formed a picture I couldn't ignore anymore. It was a Tuesday evening in late September. I remember because it was my mother's birthday, and I'd spent the afternoon shopping for a gift, finally settling on a cashmere scarf in her favorite shade of burgundy. I came home around 6:30, my arms full of shopping bags, expecting to find Jason already there since he'd texted earlier saying he'd be home by 6. The house was quiet, dim in that particular way that happens when autumn starts stealing daylight earlier each evening. I set my bags down in the foyer, slipped off my shoes, and called out his name. Nothing. His car was in the driveway, so I knew he was home. I found him in his study, hunched over his laptop, completely absorbed in whatever was on the screen. The blue light from the monitor illuminated his face in the darkening room, and for a moment, I just stood in the doorway watching him. There was something about his posture, about the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth, about the way his fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, that made my stomach clench with an anxiety I couldn't quite name. "Jason?" I said softly. He jumped, actually physically jumped, and immediately minimized whatever he'd been looking at. The guilty speed of that gesture sent ice water through my veins. "Sandra. God, you scared me. I didn't hear you come in." His laugh was too loud, too forced. "I called out," I said, moving into the room. "What are you working on?" "Just work stuff. Emails." He closed the laptop completely, stood up, kissed my cheek in that absent way that had become his default. "How was your day? Did you find something for your mom?" We moved into the kitchen, and he asked about the scarf, and we talked about what to have for dinner, and the whole time there was this new thing between us, this invisible wall that hadn't been there before, or maybe it had been there for months and I was only just now feeling its solidness. Over the following weeks, I started noticing more. The way he'd tilt his phone away from me when he was texting. The new cologne he'd started wearing, something woody and expensive that wasn't the same brand he'd worn for years. The fact that he was suddenly concerned about his appearance again, buying new shirts, spending more time at the gym, trimming his beard more carefully. These were things that, in a healthy marriage, might have made me happy, evidence that my husband was taking care of himself. But something in my gut told me he wasn't doing it for himself. And he wasn't doing it for me. The texts started appearing at odd hours. I'd wake up at 2 in the morning to use the bathroom and see the glow of his phone on his nightstand, a message notification lighting up the screen. Once, when we were watching a movie, his phone buzzed and I caught a glimpse of the name before he grabbed it. Ruth. With a little heart emoji next to her name in his contacts. A heart emoji. My husband had put a heart emoji next to another woman's name in his phone. "Who's that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Just Ruth, from work. Question about a project." He typed a quick response and set the phone face down on the couch between us. "At 9 o'clock at night? You know how these deadlines are." He didn't look at me when he said it. I wanted to press, wanted to demand to see the messages, wanted to scream that I wasn't stupid, that I could feel him slipping away from me with every passing day. But I didn't. Because I was scared. Scared of what I might find. Scared of being the jealous, suspicious wife. Scared that if I voiced my fears out loud, I'd be making them real in a way I wasn't ready to face. So I swallowed my questions and tried to focus on the movie, but I couldn't tell you what happened in the rest of it. All I could think about was that heart emoji, glowing in my mind like a neon sign I couldn't turn off. The breaking point came on a Friday in mid-October. Jason had told me he was working late, that he and some colleagues were trying to finish the Henderson proposal before Monday's presentation. He'd been staying late a lot recently, coming home at 9 or 10 with takeout containers and exhaustion etched into his face. I'd stopped waiting up, stopped trying to have those late dinners together, stopped pretending that we were still a team working toward the same goals. That particular Friday, I'd gotten off my shift early, we'd been overstaffed, and my supervisor had sent me home at 3. I decided to surprise Jason, to bring him dinner at the office, to maybe recapture some of that young love where small gestures meant everything. I stopped at his favorite Italian place, ordered the lasagna he loved, added tiramisu for dessert, and drove to his office building downtown with cautious hope fluttering in my chest. The parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived at 6:30. I made my way up to the 4th floor, the bag of food warm in my hands, already imagining his surprised smile. But when I pushed open the glass doors to Bennett and Associates, the reception area was dark. The whole office was dark, actually, except for a sliver of light coming from under a door at the far end of the floor. I walked slowly down the corridor, my footsteps muffled by the carpet, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. I could hear voices now, Jason's voice, and a woman's laugh. A warm, intimate laugh that made my skin prickle with something hot and sick. I should have knocked. I should have announced myself. But something in me needed to see, needed to know. So I eased the door open just a crack, just enough to peer inside. Jason was there, leaning against his desk, and standing in front of him, close, too close, was a woman I'd never seen before but knew immediately must be Ruth. She was younger than me, maybe early 30s, with long dark hair pulled into a casual ponytail and wearing jeans and a sweater that somehow looked effortlessly elegant in the way my carefully chosen outfits never did. She was pretty in that natural, understated way that doesn't need to be tried. And she was laughing at something Jason had said, her hand resting on his arm, her face tilted up toward his with an ease and familiarity that stabbed through me like a blade. But it wasn't just that they were alone together. It wasn't even the way they were standing so close, in each other's space in a way that spoke of countless other moments just like this. It was the look on Jason's face. The way he was looking at her, with attention, with warmth, with a light in his eyes that I hadn't seen directed at me in months, maybe years. He said something too quiet for me to hear, and she laughed again, and then she did something that made time stop. She reached up and touched his face. Just a soft, brief touch, her fingertips brushing his cheek in a gesture so tender, so intimate, that I felt something inside me crack and split open. And Jason didn't pull away. He closed his eyes for just a second, leaning into her touch like a man dying of thirst finally finding water. I don't remember backing away from the door. I don't remember walking back down the corridor, back through the dark office, back to the elevator. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in my car in the parking lot, the bag of Italian food still in my passenger seat, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed all the air from my lungs. The worst part wasn't even what I'd seen. The worst part was the sudden, crushing understanding of what I'd been refusing to acknowledge for months. This wasn't new. This hadn't just started. Whatever was happening between Jason and Ruth, it had been building for a long time, right under my nose, while I'd been making excuses and giving the benefit of the doubt and choosing to trust when every instinct in my body had been screaming at me to pay attention. I sat in that parking lot for almost an hour, watching the sun set and the sky turn from orange to purple to that deep blue-black that comes just before full darkness. I watched people leave the building, get into their cars, drive away to their homes and families and normal Friday nights. And I thought about everything I'd been ignoring. The late nights. The constant texting. The way he'd stopped touching me, really touching me, with intention and desire. The way he'd stopped seeing me, like I'd become invisible in my own marriage. The way he'd been pulling away while I'd been desperately trying to hold on to something that maybe wasn't there anymore. I drove home eventually, left the Italian food in the car because I couldn't imagine eating, couldn't imagine sitting across from Jason and pretending everything was fine. When I got inside, I poured myself a large glass of wine, something I almost never did, and sat at our kitchen table in the dark, trying to figure out what to do with this terrible knowledge I now carried. Jason came home around 9:30, breezing in with apologies about losing track of time, about the proposal taking longer than expected. He microwaved some leftover Chinese food from the fridge and sat down across from me, scrolling through his phone while he ate, not noticing, or not caring, that I'd barely said 2 words to him. "How was your day?" he asked, finally looking up. And I almost told him. Almost said, "I saw you. I saw you with her." But something stopped me. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was the part of me that still desperately wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, that what I'd witnessed wasn't what it looked like, that my husband of 12 years wouldn't betray me like this. Or maybe I just wasn't ready to blow up my life until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Fine, I said. Long. He nodded, looked back at his phone, and that was it. That was the sum total of our communication that night. Over the next few weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. I started checking his phone when he was in the shower. I looked through his emails when he fell asleep on the couch. I drove by his office at odd hours to see if his car was really there when he said he was working late. I hated myself for it, hated the desperate, suspicious creature I was becoming, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know. What I found was worse than I'd imagined, and somehow also not quite as bad. There were hundreds of texts between Jason and Ruth, messages that started innocently enough with work questions but gradually became more personal, more intimate. Inside jokes. Good morning texts. Late-night conversations about their dreams, their fears, their disappointments. He told her things about our marriage, about me, about feeling disconnected and lonely, things he'd never said to me directly, never given me a chance to address. She shared her own struggles, a difficult divorce she'd gone through 2 years ago, her fears about trusting again, her gratitude for his friendship. But here's the thing, I never found evidence of a physical affair. No hotel receipts, no explicit texts, no planning of secret meetups beyond their increasingly frequent work dinners and coffee breaks. And that almost made it worse, because I couldn't point to a clear betrayal. I couldn't say, "You cheated." What I could say was something much harder to define and defend against: "You've been giving her everything you used to give me. You've been building a relationship with her while letting ours die." It's called an emotional affair, I learned during one of many sleepless nights when I turned to Google, typing in phrases like husband close to female coworker and emotional infidelity signs, and reading article after article that described my marriage with painful accuracy. An emotional affair happens when your partner gives their emotional energy, time, and attention to someone else in a way that creates intimacy and connection that should exist in your marriage. When they share their inner world with someone else while closing you out. When they seek comfort, understanding, and validation from someone else instead of from you. And that's exactly what Jason had been doing. He'd been falling in love with Ruth, maybe not physically, maybe not in a way he'd even fully recognized or admitted to himself, but falling nonetheless. And every moment he gave her, every laugh they shared, every meaningful conversation they had, was a moment he was taking from us, from the marriage we'd promised to protect and prioritize above all else. The final confrontation came on a Saturday morning in late November. We were supposed to go to my sister's house for brunch, but Jason begged off, saying he needed to run into the office for a few hours to pick up some files. It was the lie that finally broke me, the casual, easy way he lied now, like it had become second nature. Because I knew, somehow I just knew, that he wasn't going to the office. He was going to meet Ruth. "Don't," I said. We were standing in our bedroom, morning light streaming through the curtains, the maple tree outside nearly bare now, its crimson leaves long since fallen and blown away. "Don't what?" He was pulling on a sweater, not looking at me. "Don't lie to me anymore. Please. Just don't." He froze, his hand still on the hem of his sweater. "Sandra, I don't know what." "You're not going to the office. You're going to meet Ruth." My voice was shaking, but I kept going. "And I need you to stop pretending that I'm crazy or paranoid or imagining things. I need you to stop treating me like I'm stupid." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. I watched emotions flicker across his face: surprise, guilt, defensiveness, resignation. Finally, he sat down on the edge of our bed, his shoulders sagging in a way that told me everything. "How long have you known?" His voice was quiet, defeated. "Months. Since I came to bring you dinner and saw you two together." I sat down in the armchair across from him, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me up. "How long has it been going on?" "Nothing is going on. We're just friends." The laugh that came out of me was harsh, bitter. Don't insult me like that. Friends don't text each other at 2 in the morning. Friends don't have heart emojis next to their names. Friends don't look at each other the way I saw her looking at you. We haven't done anything inappropriate, he insisted, finally meeting my eyes. I swear to you, Sandra. We've never kissed, never. But you want to. It wasn't a question. You want to, and she wants to, and the only reason you haven't is because you're technically still married to me. He didn't deny it. God, I wished he'd denied it. But he just sat there, looking at me with something that might have been remorse or might have just been regret at being caught. I didn't mean for this to happen, he said finally. I didn't go looking for this. Ruth and I, we connected. She understands me. She listens. She makes me feel. What? Alive? Special? Seen? The tears I'd been holding back for months finally spilled over. I used to make you feel those things, Jason. I used to be the person you told everything to, the person who understood you, the person whose opinion mattered. When did I stop being that person? And why didn't you tell me before you went looking for it somewhere else? I didn't go looking. But you found it, and you chose to pursue it instead of trying to fix what we had. I wiped at my tears, angry at myself for crying. You chose to invest in a relationship with her while letting ours starve. Do you know how many nights I waited for you to come home? How many times have I tried to start a conversation and you were texting her instead? How invisible you've made me feel. You're not invisible, he said, but even as he said it, it rang hollow. Sandra, you have to understand, things between us have been difficult for a while. We've been disconnected. You're always tired from work, and I'm stressed about the new job, and we drifted. Marriage drift. I almost shouted. That's what happens in every long-term relationship. People drift. Life gets hard and busy and exhausting. But you don't fix that by checking out and finding someone new to make you feel better. You fix it by doing the work, by communicating, by trying. I know. His voice cracked. I know, and I'm sorry. God, Sandra, I'm so sorry. Are you in love with her? The question hung between us like smoke. I watched him struggle with it, watched him try to find words that would hurt me less, and finally give up and just tell the truth. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know what this is. All I know is that when I'm with Ruth, I feel like myself again. Like the version of me I used to be before life got so heavy. She makes me laugh. She's excited about the future. She doesn't look at me with disappointment in her eyes like you do. That hurt worse than anything else he could have said. I never looked at you with disappointment until you gave me reasons to be disappointed. We sat there in our bedroom, two people who'd promised forever and somehow ended up here, with 12 years of history and no clear path forward. Outside, I could hear our neighbors' kids playing in their yard, their laughter carrying on the cold November air, a reminder that life goes on, indifferent to the small tragedies unfolding behind closed doors. What do we do now? Jason asked finally. And that was the question, wasn't it? The question I'd been asking myself for weeks. Because here's the thing about emotional affairs, they're complicated. Jason hadn't technically cheated. He hadn't broken our marriage vows in the traditional sense. But he'd betrayed me in ways that felt even more fundamental. He'd given his heart to someone else while his ring was still on his finger. He'd chosen to build intimacy with Ruth while letting our intimacy crumble. And I didn't know if that was something we could come back from, or if I even wanted to try. I need you to be honest with me, I said. Completely honest, for the first time in months. Do you want to save this marriage? He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with it, seeing the part of him that wanted to say yes because it was the right answer, the answer a good husband should give. But I could also see the part of him that was already halfway out the door, already imagining a different life with a different person who hadn't seen him at his worst, who didn't carry years of baggage and disappointments and fertility struggles and failed dreams. I don't know, he said finally. I don't know if we can fix this. I don't know if what we had is still there, or if we're just holding on because we're scared of letting go. And there it was. The truth I'd been circling for months, finally spoken out loud. My marriage was ending, not with a bang but with a whimper, not with betrayal in a hotel room but with text messages and shared coffees and the slow, steady transfer of emotional intimacy from one woman to another. "I think you need to leave," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. "Not forever, maybe. But for now. I need space to think, and you need to figure out what you actually want instead of straddling two relationships and being fair to neither of us." He nodded slowly, and I could see relief in his eyes. Relief. That's what hurt most. He was relieved to be asked to leave, relieved to not have to choose, relieved to have permission to see where things might go with Ruth without technically ending our marriage first. He packed a bag that afternoon. Watching him move through our house, selecting clothes and toiletries with careful consideration, I felt like I was watching our marriage end in slow motion. He promised he was going to stay with his brother, promised this was just temporary, promised we'd figure things out. But we both knew the promises didn't mean much anymore. He'd already broken the most important ones. After he left, I sat in our too-quiet house and let myself finally, fully fall apart. I cried for the girl I'd been at 26, full of hope and dreams and naive faith that love conquered all. I cried for the years we'd spent building a life that turned out to be more fragile than I'd ever imagined. I cried for the children we'd never had, wondering if that loss had created a distance between us that we'd never acknowledged or addressed. I cried for the version of Jason I'd fallen in love with, the man who'd held me during those fertility treatments and told me we were enough just as we were, who'd danced with me in our empty house before we'd even furnished it, who'd once looked at me the way he now looked at Ruth. But I also cried for myself. For the woman I'd become, the one who'd ignored her instincts, who'd made excuses, who'd let herself become invisible in her own life. I cried because I'd failed to notice when my marriage started dying, failed to fight for it before it was too late, failed to demand better from my husband and from myself. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my life. Jason stayed with his brother, but I knew he was seeing Ruth. He didn't say it directly, but I could tell from the way he sounded when we talked, lighter, happier, like a weight had been lifted. Meanwhile, I was drowning, trying to figure out who I was outside of being Jason's wife, trying to imagine a future I'd never planned for, trying to decide whether to fight for a marriage my husband seemed relieved to leave. I threw myself into work, picking up extra shifts, staying late, volunteering for the difficult cases no one else wanted. At least at the hospital, I felt needed. At least there, I could make a difference. I avoided our bedroom, sleeping instead on the couch because our bed felt too big, too empty, haunted by the ghost of the man who used to sleep beside me. I stopped cooking, eating cereal for dinner and sometimes skipping meals entirely. I stopped answering calls from friends who wanted to check on me, stopped going to the book club I'd belonged to for 5 years, stopped doing anything that required me to pretend I was okay when I was so clearly not. My friend Emily, my best friend since nursing school, finally showed up at my door one Saturday morning about 3 weeks after Jason left. She didn't ask permission, just pushed her way in with bags of groceries and a determined expression. "Enough," she said, looking around at my disaster of a house, dishes piled in the sink, laundry in heaps, dust gathering on surfaces I used to clean religiously. "You're allowed to fall apart. You're allowed to be angry and sad and devastated. But you're not allowed to disappear. Not on my watch." She spent the day cleaning while I protested weakly. She made me eat a real meal. She sat with me while I cried, again, about the unfairness of it all, about how Ruth got the easy part, the falling in love part, while I'd done the hard work of being a wife through the boring, difficult, unglamorous years. "You're right," Emily said. "She does get the easy part. She gets the version of Jason who's on his best behavior, who's trying to impress her, who hasn't disappointed her yet. But you know what else? She gets the version of Jason who was capable of doing this to you. Who handled his marriage problems by checking out instead of confronting them. Who lied and snuck around and justified an emotional affair because he was lonely. Is that really such a prize?" Her words struck something in me, shifted something in my perspective. Because she was right. I'd been so focused on what I'd lost, on feeling rejected and replaced, that I hadn't really thought about what Ruth was actually getting. She wasn't getting the Jason I'd fallen in love with. She was getting the Jason who'd revealed himself capable of betrayal, of selfishness, of taking the easy way out when things got hard. And maybe, that wasn't something worth mourning after all. Still, I wasn't ready to give up entirely. Against my better judgment, against Emily's advice, I suggested marriage counseling. Jason agreed, though I could hear the reluctance in his voice. We found a therapist, Dr. Morrison, and for 6 weeks we sat in her office every Thursday evening and tried to excavate what had gone wrong. Those sessions were brutal. Dr. Morrison didn't let either of us off easy. She made Jason admit that yes, what he'd done with Ruth was cheating, even if they'd never been physical. She made him acknowledge the betrayal, the lies, the way he'd rewritten our marriage history to justify his actions, painting me as distant and cold when really, he'd been the one pulling away. But she also made me look at my part in our drift. Made me admit that I'd stopped trying too, that I'd let work consume me, that I'd been so focused on the children we didn't have that I'd stopped appreciating the husband I did have. It made me see that I'd been angry at Jason for years, angry about the infertility, angry about him not wanting to pursue adoption, angry about the life I'd imagined that we weren't living, and that anger had created its own kind of distance. Here's what I'm hearing, Dr. Morrison said during our 5th session. I'm hearing 2 people who experienced a profound loss together, the loss of the children you wanted, and instead of grieving together, you grieved separately and let that grief build walls between you. Jason felt inadequate because he couldn't give you what you wanted most. Sandra felt abandoned because Jason didn't want to explore alternatives. Both of you stopped communicating openly, stopped being vulnerable with each other, stopped prioritizing your connection. And into that gap, Ruth walked. So this is my fault? I asked, anger flaring. Because we couldn't have kids, Jason gets to have an emotional affair? No, Dr. Morrison said firmly. Jason's choices are his own, and he owns them completely. But if you want to rebuild this marriage, you both need to understand how you got here. You need to grieve what you lost together. You need to learn to communicate again. And Sandra, you need to decide if you can forgive Jason and trust him again. And Jason, you need to decide if you're willing to do the hard work of rebuilding that trust while ending your relationship with Ruth completely. That was the sticking point. Ruth. Because Jason wasn't willing to cut contact entirely. They worked together, he argued. They had to interact. They were friends, and he didn't think it was fair that he had to give up an important friendship because I was insecure. Insecure. That word echoed in my head for days. Because that's what he'd reduced it to, my problem, my insecurity, my inability to trust. Not his betrayal. Not his choices. Not his complete failure to set appropriate boundaries with a woman he'd admitted to maybe loving. After that session, I knew. I knew with a clarity that was both devastating and freeing. This marriage was over. Not because I didn't love Jason, I did, despite everything. Not because I hadn't tried, God knows I'd tried. But because you can't rebuild trust with someone who doesn't think they've broken it. You can't save a marriage when one person is still protecting their affair partner instead of their spouse. You can't move forward with someone who's still looking backward at the road not taken. I filed for divorce on a Tuesday in January. The coldest day of the year, the weather app on my phone said, with wind chills below zero and ice covering everything. It felt appropriate somehow, the weather matching the ice that had formed around my heart. Jason was shocked, I think, even though he shouldn't have been. I think part of him believed I'd wait forever, that I'd keep giving him space to figure out what he wanted while I put my life on hold. But I was done waiting. Done being the understanding wife. Done competing with the fantasy of a woman who got the best parts of my husband while I dealt with the aftermath of his selfishness. The divorce was relatively simple. No kids, no complicated assets beyond the house, which we sold at a small loss. We split everything down the middle, the savings account, the retirement funds, the wedding china we'd never really used. We divided up 12 years of life with cold efficiency, mediated by lawyers in fluorescent-lit conference rooms. I heard through mutual friends that Jason and Ruth started dating officially about a month after our divorce was finalized. They didn't wait long, apparently, to make public what had been building in private for over a year. Part of me wanted to rage about that, wanted to feel vindicated that I'd been right all along, that their friendship had been exactly what I'd suspected. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired and sad and relieved that it was finally over. That first year after the divorce was a journey of rediscovery. I moved into a small apartment across town, a one-bedroom place with hardwood floors and big windows that let in morning light. It wasn't much, but it was mine, just mine, in a way our house had never been. I painted the walls colors Jason would have hated, hung artwork I'd always loved but had compromised on. I adopted a cat from the shelter, a grumpy orange tabby named Biscuit who'd been returned twice for being antisocial but who curled up on my lap every evening and purred like a motorboat. I started therapy on my own, working through not just the divorce but the infertility grief I'd never properly processed, the ways I'd lost myself in trying to be what everyone else needed, the patterns I'd fallen into by ignoring my own instincts. I learned to sit with uncomfortable truths. I learned that I'd stayed in a dying marriage far longer than I should have because I was terrified of failure, of being alone, of admitting that I'd made a mistake at 26 and thinking love was enough. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones. I started taking a pottery class on Thursday evenings, the same night Jason and I used to do counseling, and discovered I had a talent for it, or at least a joy in it. There was something meditative about working with clay, about shaping something with my hands, about the way you could destroy what you made and start over if it wasn't right. I went on a few dates, though nothing serious. I wasn't ready for that, wasn't ready to trust again or let someone in. But it felt good to remember that I was still a woman who could be desired, who could make someone laugh, who had worth beyond being someone's wife. And slowly, painfully, I forgave Jason. Not because he asked for it, he never really did. Not because what he did was okay, it wasn't. But because carrying around that anger, that betrayal, that bitterness was like drinking poison and expecting him to die. It was only hurting me. Forgiveness, I learned, wasn't about letting him off the hook. It was about releasing myself from the prison of resentment I'd been living in. I forgave him for the affair, for the lies, for choosing the easy path instead of fighting for us. But I also forgave myself. I forgave myself for not being perfect, for the ways I'd contributed to our drift, for staying too long in something that had stopped working. I forgave the younger version of me who thought marriage was supposed to look a certain way and had clung to that vision even when reality was screaming something different. About 18 months after the divorce, I ran into Jason at a coffee shop downtown. It was inevitable in a city this size, but still, my heart jumped when I saw him standing in line, looking older somehow, tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. Ruth was with him, of course. She looked uncomfortable when she saw me, like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I wondered if Jason had told her I'd be there, or if this was as much of an ambush for her as it was for me. "Sandra," Jason said, and there was something in his voice, regret, maybe, or nostalgia. "It's good to see you." "You too," I said, and meant it. Because it was good, in a strange way. Good to see him and feel nothing but a distant fondness for the man he'd been, the life we'd shared. Good to realize that the sight of him with her didn't destroy me anymore. We made small talk for a few minutes, carefully polite, the way you are with someone who used to know everything about you and now knows nothing. He told me he'd been promoted to senior architect. I told him about the pottery class, about Biscuit. Ruth stood silently beside him, and I wondered what version of our story she'd been told, what lies Jason had needed to tell himself to make their beginning feel less like a betrayal and more like fate. "I should go," I said finally. "But Jason, I hope you're happy." "I really do." And I meant that too. Because his happiness or unhappiness didn't define my worth anymore. His choices weren't a reflection on me, they were a reflection on him, on what he was capable of, on what he valued. And I'd learned, painfully but thoroughly, that I couldn't control anyone's choices but my own. Walking out of that coffee shop, back into the bright spring afternoon, I felt something shift inside me. The last piece of the old Sandra, the one who'd defined herself by her marriage, by her husband's opinion of her, by her failure to become a mother, she finally, fully let go. And in her place was someone stronger, someone who'd been tested and broken and had somehow put herself back together into something more authentic, more real. That night, I sat in my little apartment with Biscuit purring in my lap, and I thought about the past 2 years. About how I'd thought my life was ending when Jason left, how I'd believed I couldn't survive without him, without us. But I survived. More than that, I'd begun to thrive. I thought about Ruth, about how I'd spent so long seeing her as the villain in my story, the other woman who'd stolen my husband. But the truth was more complicated than that. Ruth hadn't stolen anything. Jason had given pieces of himself away freely, had chosen to build something with her while letting what we had crumble. And Ruth herself was probably just a lonely woman who'd fallen for a man who'd made himself available, who'd presented himself as disconnected and misunderstood, who'd painted his marriage as already over in all but name. Neither of them were villains, really. They were just people making choices, some good and some terrible, trying to find happiness in a complicated world. And I could spend the rest of my life being angry about those choices, or I could accept that this was simply how my story had unfolded, and that maybe, just maybe, it had unfolded exactly as it needed to. Because here's what I learned from my husband's innocent friendship that wasn't. Sometimes the betrayals that hurt most aren't the obvious ones. They're the slow erosion of intimacy, the gradual choosing of someone else over you, the death by 1,000 small cuts of being made to feel crazy for noticing what your gut has been screaming at you all along. Emotional affairs are insidious because they hide in plain sight, disguised as friendship, justified by loneliness, defended as harmless because there's no sex involved. But intimacy isn't just physical. It's the sharing of your inner world, the vulnerability of being truly known, the choice to give your emotional energy and attention and care to someone. And when you're married, that intimacy is supposed to be protected, prioritized, kept sacred between you and your spouse. Jason violated that sacred space, not in a hotel room but in text messages and late-night conversations and meaningful glances across an office. He let someone else into the intimate spaces of his heart that should have been reserved for me, and he did it gradually enough that he could convince himself, and try to convince me, that it wasn't really cheating. But it was. And I learned that you don't need proof of sex to know your marriage is being betrayed. You just need to trust yourself, trust your instincts, trust that feeling in your gut that says something is wrong even when you can't quite prove it yet. I also learned that marriages don't usually end because of one big thing. They end because of hundreds of small things, little moments of disconnection, tiny choices to turn away instead of toward each other, gradual accumulations of resentment and disappointment that neither person addresses until it's too late. Jason and I had problems long before Ruth appeared. We'd stopped talking, stopped trying, stopped making our relationship a priority. And into that vacuum, she walked. But if it hadn't been Ruth, it probably would have been someone else eventually, or maybe just the slow death of indifference. What I wish I'd done differently is this: I wish I'd trusted myself sooner. I wish I'd confronted Jason the first time my gut told me something was off, instead of spending months making excuses for him. I wish I'd demanded we go to counseling when we first started drifting, not after the damage was already catastrophic. I wish I'd been brave enough to have the hard conversations about our infertility grief, about whether we were still happy, about what we needed from each other to feel loved and connected. But I also learned that sometimes, even when you do everything right, things still fall apart. Sometimes people grow apart instead of together. Sometimes love isn't enough when one person has already checked out emotionally. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is let go of something that's hurting you, even when you're terrified of what comes next. Today, I'm 40 years old. Single. No kids. Starting over in so many ways. And some days that still feels like failure, like I didn't get the life I planned for, like I'm behind where I should be. But other days, more and more days now, it feels like freedom. Like possibility. Like a second chance to build a life that's truly mine, not a compromise or a performance or an attempt to be what someone else needs. I still work as a pediatric nurse, still pour my love into the children who come through my hospital, still find meaning in being present for them during their scariest, most vulnerable moments. I still take my pottery class, and I've gotten good enough that I sell pieces at local craft fairs on weekends. I still have Biscuit, and I've added a rescue dog named Murphy who's anxiety-ridden and poorly trained and who I absolutely adore. I have friends who show up, who check on me, who remind me that I'm loved even when I'm not part of a couple. And I'm learning, slowly, to be enough for myself. To not need someone else's validation to feel worthy. To know that my value isn't determined by whether someone chooses me, but by how I choose to show up in the world. To understand that being alone isn't the same as being lonely, and that sometimes solitude is exactly what you need to remember who you are. I don't know if I'll ever get married again. I don't know if I can trust someone enough to be that vulnerable again, to risk that kind of hurt again. But I'm open to it, in a way I wasn't a year ago. I'm open to the possibility that somewhere out there might be someone who's done their own work, who knows how to communicate, who understands that love isn't just a feeling but a daily choice to show up, to be present, to prioritize the person they've committed to even when it's hard. And if that person never comes, I'll still be okay. Better than okay. Because I've learned that I can survive heartbreak and come out stronger. I've learned that I'm capable of rebuilding a life from scratch. I've learned that my worth isn't tied to being someone's wife or someone's mother, but to being fully, authentically myself. If you're going through something similar, if you're the one lying awake at night while your partner texts someone else, if you're the one making excuses for behavior that makes your stomach hurt, if you're the one being told you're overreacting when every instinct is screaming that something is wrong, please listen to yourself. Trust your gut. Don't wait as long as I did to confront what you already know. Don't let someone make you feel crazy for noticing their betrayal. Don't sacrifice your peace, your mental health, your sense of self-worth for someone who's already choosing someone else. And if you're the one having the innocent friendship, if you're the Jason or the Ruth in someone else's story, please understand what you're doing. Understand that emotional intimacy with someone who's not your partner is still betrayal. Understand that you can't build something real on the foundation of someone else's pain. Understand that the easy excitement of a new connection will eventually give way to the same hard work of maintaining intimacy that you're avoiding in your current relationship. The grass isn't greener on the other side, it's greener where you water it. And if you're not willing to water your marriage, have the courage and respect to end it before you start planting seeds elsewhere. For me, the journey from that October night when I saw Jason and Ruth together to where I am now has been the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than the infertility treatments, harder than losing my father, harder than anything I could have imagined. There were days I didn't think I'd survive it. Days I didn't want to. But I did survive. And somewhere along the way, I stopped just surviving and started actually living again. I started making choices based on what I wanted, not what I thought I should want. Started building a life that felt authentic instead of performative. Started believing that maybe my best years aren't behind me, maybe they're still ahead. My marriage ended, yes. But I didn't. And that's the thing about heartbreak, it cracks you open, but what grows in those cracks can be beautiful if you let it. Strength. Wisdom. Self-knowledge. Compassion for yourself and others. A deeper understanding of what love really means, what it requires, what it's worth. I used to think that Jason leaving was the worst thing that could happen to me. Now I know it was the thing that saved me. Saved me from a lifetime of feeling invisible, of begging for scraps of attention from someone who'd already mentally moved on, of compromising myself into smaller and smaller versions of who I was meant to be. His leaving broke me, yes. But it also freed me to become someone I actually like, someone who knows her worth, someone who won't settle for being someone's second choice ever again. So if you're in that dark place right now, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, wondering if the pain will ever ease, wondering if you made a mistake by staying or by leaving, I want you to know that you will heal. It won't be fast, and it won't be linear, and some days will feel like you're back at square one. But slowly, imperceptibly, you'll start to notice that you're laughing again, that you're interested in things again, that you can go whole hours or even days without thinking about them. And one day, maybe a year from now or 5 years from now, you'll run into them, or you'll just be living your life, and you'll realize that you're genuinely happy. Not pretending, not faking it until you make it, but truly, deeply happy in a way that comes from being at peace with yourself. And you'll understand that what felt like an ending was actually a beginning. That losing them meant finding yourself. That their innocent friendship, as devastating as it was actually the catalyst for you becoming the person you were always meant to be. My name is Sandra. I'm 40 years old. I'm a nurse, a potter, a dog and cat mom, a friend, a sister, a survivor. I'm no longer defined by being someone's wife, by my inability to have children, by the ways others have betrayed or disappointed me. I'm defined by how I chose to respond to those disappointments. By how I picked myself up. By how I forgave others and myself. By how I learned to take up space again, to use my voice, to trust myself. And I'm telling you this story, this painful, messy, complicated story, because I want you to know that you're not alone. Whatever you're going through, whatever betrayal you're facing, whatever heartbreak is breaking you right now, you're not alone. And you're going to be okay. More than okay. You're going to be strong in ways you never knew you could be. Trust yourself. Love yourself. Fight for yourself. And know that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go of something that's hurting you, even when letting go is the scariest thing you've ever done. You deserve someone who chooses you every single day, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. You deserve someone who protects your intimacy, who communicates openly, who does the work instead of looking for an escape. You deserve someone who sees you, truly sees you, and thinks they've won the lottery. And if that person is only you right now, that's okay too. Because you're enough. You've always been enough. And your story, like mine, is far from over. In fact, it's just beginning. Let me know your thoughts about this story, subscribe and leave a comment of encouragement to support us. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.